I'm here with Dee-dee Stout. Dee-dee, thanks for being with me.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk about something.
Well,
We'll figure out what that is.
That's what I'm thinking too. It's just been nice to secretly. People say, "Oh, you're the busiest man on earth," and I'm like, I just want to keep talking. Just someone talk to me.
I know.
I should let you introduce yourself in some ways, because I bet if I start to try to read your bona fides, you are a moving target.
Oh.
Like, you're always taking on something and doing something cool. But I know about you from the group Families for Sensible Drug Policy.
Mhm.
That's how I heard your name first.
Mhm.
And you write a blog with them, and I know you're active with that group. Listeners will know who they are by now. And
Good,
you wrote the
good, because
book.
it's a great organization.
It is a great organization, and so, several people who I want to have on the show, but who are they're either busy doing advocacy or they're a little camera shy. But we'll try to get them on here.
Ah,
But
well, I can help you with that, maybe.
yeah.
So, let me know. We'll conspire together.
You wrote the book Coming to Harm Reduction, Kicking and Screaming, which
Uh-huh.
I mean, just you can read the title a few times alone and get some entertainment out of it. But it's a great book.
Came to me in a dream, by the way.
Is that right?
Yeah, seriously.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, I was thinking in my head kind of I think I was teaching at City College in San Francisco then, which was, well, it still is, an AOD, as we call it, alcohol and other drug certification program. And I taught several classes there, 5 or 6, something like that, for 12, 13 years, something along those lines. And most people that came to that program were in a traditional recovery, we'll call it, abstinence-based, 12-step oriented. And as I became more and more involved in harm reduction, it seemed like we would kind of have this tension, or sometimes literally butting heads, like I'm doing my hands here. And I got to thinking about 12-step in my years in AA in particular, and thinking, what was a book that really made a difference to me? What was there one that really spoke to me? And it was called Come to Believe, or Came to Believe. It's a little book. I don't know if you're aware of it.
No, I don't know what it is.
But you are. It's this little red book, little paperback guy. And all it is a compilation of stories of how different people came to believe in something. Sort of, a higher power. Some people call it God. Some people call it, the community of recovering people. I mean, there's all kinds of different definitions. Themselves, that's also part of it. And I thought, I just like the stories, and it's stories. And then got thinking, historically in cultures, that's how first cultures continue, right? Is through narratives, it's through stories. Before we ever had the written word, we had stories. That is what also tends to influence people.
Yeah.
Is stories from people who have been there, or who have thought this way, or whatever your kind of genre is. And I thought, well, maybe that's the way to begin to influence so-called 12-steppers to come to harm reduction, kind of accept it a little bit better, or understand it better to start with, instead of this constant kind of lecturing at them, which I'm not saying that's what we were doing, but that's how it felt to them. They're wrong, we're right, that sort of thing. And I wanted to try to get out of that binary, because I think that's really problematic. And then, people just get more entrenched in what they believe. We've certainly seen that in the last few years, huh? So that was the initial thinking for me around it. And I started looking around and seeing people who were in harm reduction, and realized that I knew a lot of people, particularly some longstanding researchers here in this country, who never believed in the disease concept. And that also kind of blew my mind. It's like, how are you getting all this money from our government when our government is perpetuating this, disease concept over here, and yet their research is saying, nah, not really. We're maybe for a handful, but really, nah, that's not the way it works. And I thought, how did that happen? And how did they never come to believe? How did they avoid that cultural pressure? to join the herd, if you will. You know? And then I looked for another group of people like me who had either been in 12-step or who still were, many of whom worked in the field. In fact, I'm trying to think, I think all of them perhaps worked in the field or were working in the field at the time when I interviewed them, and who could do both at the same time. And the very first person that I interviewed was Alan Clear, who at that time was the head of, help me out because my memory is terrible right now, the Harm Reduction Coalition.
Okay.
Honestly, Dee-dee.
Sorry. I thought you meant before. I thought maybe there's something before that.
No.
Anyway.
No. Yeah, just Harm Reduction Coalition.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that he was in a traditional recovery. And I interviewed him down at the Department of Public Health building in San Francisco. We met after a meeting. I turned on my little tape recorder back in the day there, which wasn't that long ago, actually, and said, let's talk about this. How in the world have you headed this organization that's all about harm reduction and, you know, almost social justice? Well, not almost, it is social justice harm reduction, right? You know, kind of in your face sometimes. And you're going to 12-step meetings yourself over here. How are you doing that?
Very interesting.
And part of that was my own struggle, to tell you the truth. I mean, I was fully in harm reduction as a concept. How I thought about it and how I behaved was an evolving process. And I like to think it's going to always be an evolving process, that's the point. We don't ever arrive. Yeah, because I think that's the danger.
Yeah, we always you know, I look at the two grandparents that I have still alive.
Oh, lucky you.
And I think on their worst days of thinking, it's like, I've decided on my belief system now, so leave me alone.
Yeah.
And I kind of think tacitly, like, I don't want to be there. I want, like you're saying, I want to always be fluidly exploring and thinking. So anyway, what you're saying jives with the way I think.
That's great. Yeah. Well, and believe me, I get the attraction, the seduction of the other side.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about religion. I get the seduction of that charismatic, you know, whatever you want to call it, the evangelical sort of simplistic, if you will, way of thinking. This is right, this is wrong, the real duality. And it's very clear. And I think, wouldn't that be easier?
I wanted to ask you about your title actually suggests that. Your title is like almost like I didn't introduce this part about you yet, but I bet people have intuited that you are a clinician and you work with people in mental health or addiction.
I'm a fake therapist. Yeah.
A fake therapist. Well, you're
State of California, I can't call myself a therapist.
Oh, okay. Well, you're a very well credentialed fake therapist. The most qualified.
In Vermont, I might be able to be.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Vermont has its own licensure, but you seem to have enough credentials behind you to be able to do it. Anyway, the title seems like a nice therapy. I don't want to call it a trick, but a way to it's almost like motivational interviewing itself. It's because you're saying you're being humble in the title and, you know, joking, being jovial about kicking and screaming. It suggests something about yourself that, you know, I came to this belief, but hey, trust me, it wasn't, you know, I didn't walk right into it like a ray of sunshine, and I haven't always been here. It's a nice disarming kind of a title. Did you mean to do that?
I did. I mean, when I woke up thinking about this title, I actually went to Pat Denning, and we had dinner one night in Oakland, and I said, I need your help. I've got this, I think it's a great title for a book. I just woke up with it, and I want to talk you into writing it with me, or would you let me, you know, participate in it somehow? And I remember she didn't miss a beat and said, I'm not writing another fucking book. Although she has, but that's more Jeannie. That's Jeannie, that's not Pat. And she said, but I'll tell you what, I will write the introduction, the foreword for your book, you know, and help you with that. Because she just, when she heard the title, when I said it to her, she just cracked up. And I said, that's the response I want. Because again, it's so serious. And people get so wedded to this, you know, 12-step is everything. And you've got to be doing this. And you've got to work the steps. And you've got to do this or you're going to die. You know, the jails, institutions, and death. That's scary shit. And I'm not suggesting, I mean, as you know, I had a client die this year. I get it.
Yeah.
It is. And we've got to have a little levity to it too. We have got to be able to step out of that, particularly as clinicians, and step back a bit and look at the insanity, for lack of a better word, at the way we've been treating people in treatment, in rehab, the lack of options that exist. Nowhere else in medical or social worlds do we have this few options. And we certainly don't have one way of treating anything that I can think of. So that part, and then realizing that all of that needed to have a little bit of levity to it, that I think that might engage people more. So there's that MI piece that, I'm trying to think, or sales piece. I'm not sure which or both, because I come out of sales too, of trying to just get my toe in the door. I don't care about my foot. Just let me get the toe in the door and let's have a conversation about this. And that has been effective, that part of it, whether people go on to consider what I've said or what other people have said that I interviewed, that, yes and no, right? But that's what I expected. But at least with the title, I know it made me laugh thinking of it. And thought maybe this can work, maybe this can have just a tiny bit of influence, and I'll be happy with that. That's okay for me.
It's a really underrated book, I think, because it's one of. You're welcome. I'm not really just. I'm not in the business of saying that just to blow people up. Yeah. I'm really not. But I hear a lot of people, who are in harm reduction talk about the book and say really nice things about the book, or have a part in it that they quote or remember. Yet it's not, you're not top of the charts, and you don't talk about it like it's your baby or your total life's work, but not that you're not proud of it.
I'm very bad that way. I'm a terrible marketer for myself.
You're in sales,
and the irony is exactly. I have been in marketing numerous times in my life, and I'm a great marketer for other people. And when it comes to me, I just forget.
I know what you mean.
Not there.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
But to give value to people listening, so I would assume that a solid chunk of people listening, if anything on our past metrics has anything to say about it, are going to be people in our program. And so just be interested to get your take. You're with that background, you have now entered harm reduction land, and obviously you see some wisdom and benefit to treating. I say the word treating, but I don't mean that medically. I'm just treating human beings as though they have reasons for doing the things that they do, as though they're not to be puppets to be manipulated through some sort of a programming or regiment, or that you can just sell them on. And at the same time, you see wisdom in, a lot of it's not like things like 12 steps have zero wisdom packed behind their programming or writing. So can you parse those two a little bit? Maybe talk about what harm reduction is to you and some of the wisdom that you understand about the other side of the aisle.
Yeah. Good question, Zach, as always. So harm reduction, to me, I'm going to use Dan Biggs, any positive change. He was a big influence in my life. God, I'm getting choked up. Yikes. And I miss him terribly. And I think that was one of the times that I had a big aha moment. I'll share that story with you. So I had gone to Chicago. My folks happened to live there too. And so I met Dan, and he had, I think, just gotten a new van for
actually, could you talk about who
Meal Exchange?
Tell people who Dan is before.
The late now Dan Big was the executive director and founder of the see, here we go. The Chicago Recovery Alliance. I'm thinking of the initials, and then I forget what the actual acronym stands for. And the slogan for CRA was any positive change. And I love that. And there's a whole story that goes with that people can read in the book, actually, because I got to interview Dan.
Yeah.
I also went out with him in the van during the time that I was there. And I had never had any experience with what we called needle exchange in those days, NEPs, right? Needle exchange programs. And my mind was blown. Yeah, I knew, again, theoretically, I bought into the concept of needle exchange being a positive thing,
Yes.
of it being more than just a place where people get clean needles, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't see it for myself. And I saw it those 2 days that I went out with him. I also interviewed several of the participants in needle exchange, which never made it into the book. I still have those interviews. I threatened to do something with those periodically.
Interesting.
Because the stories were incredible.
I bet.
One of the guys I will never forget confronted me and said, "You're not talking to me because I'm loaded, huh?" And so you think I have nothing worthwhile to say. And stopped me in my tracks, as it is right now. And just sort of said, what do I say to that? And I said, okay, come on, talk to me. And it was one of the most moving conversations that I've ever had with someone who was fully aware of what they were doing. They were fully entrenched in the idea that they needed to get away from this at some point. They had some abstinence periods of time, and they were just where they were right now and doing the best they could, given some circumstances that had occurred. And it was just amazing for me to listen to this man. It just blew every stereotype I ever knew of someone who's quote unquote addicted to a drug. And I'm now even parsing that in my head after having read some Bruce Alexander recently.
Yeah.
And he was so articulate and thoughtful. Yeah. And so I walked away and I was teaching, right? So I came back to the classroom that fall and said, you folks, we're going to look at this differently. And so one of the things I started doing was making my students, this was one of the projects, go to a needle exchange. I said, you must go, at least go for an hour or something and talk to folks, or you can volunteer if you want to go that far. I'm not suggesting you have to do that, but I want you to go talk to somebody at needle exchange and see what they're doing. And many people came back and said, thank you for making us do that, because that really opened my eyes. So one of the things that I really saw was that a lot of people were not coming to even get needles. That was not their interest. Or they might be getting them for someone else, or they found them on the street, so they're bringing in the trash, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. But they were there for wound care, or they were there for Dan and his gang were also handing out some food, like they had loaves of bread that they'd gotten from the day old Wonder Bread store or something like that, and so they were giving that out. And they also had lots of pamphlets on shelters for people unhoused. They had free medical care. They had free eats. They had all kinds of rehabs and support groups, that just sort of everything. And almost without exception, when there was an interaction, a conversation between a staff and someone coming in for services, there was also a conversation of, how's it going this week? It's been a couple of weeks. How are you doing with your drug use? This idea culturally that we have that, well, needle exchange is bad because nobody talks about recovery, is so much bullshit. It's like, no, that they are there to help people make a change. Yeah. Now, it may be using a clean syringe instead of a dirty one, but it can also be all sorts of other things. And this is a really important interaction with healthcare that also is a positive one. How many times do we have negative interactions with our healthcare system? I had a miserable one last week myself. Yeah.
So it's like I love the concept, any positive change. I actually didn't know it came from Dan Bigg.
Yeah. Well, it's not Dan. It's actually somebody else from HIVIS, which is it was an HIV support group So you'll have to read the chapter for the full story because I
Damn
can't
it,
remember all of it.
I have. Well,
I know, me too.
I don't have any.
You know.
You caught me on a good day too. I'm not overwhelmed. I should be remembering everything. But
Yeah, my memory's shot. So
but
as
I
you
like,
could tell.
but I like that concept. Of course, is as you've described. Whether it is somebody is bringing in a syringe that was on the street and could have been potentially dangerous, to somebody wanting to make a more monumental life change, that it was there. I mean, if you make no change, then there's all the risk. There's all the downsides of any behavior that you might want to be ameliorating. If you make some kind of change, or even the gesture that you're trying to do something for the betterment of yourself or for other people, how could you say that that's not beneficial? And so, yeah, I can imagine Dan is one of those people that I never got to meet. And I remember one time I was supposed to be at a conference and I never made it down there, and he was there. And, you know, he was you heard about him, and it was like a popular person, you know, people got a lot of value from him. And it wasn't until he passed away that I realized how like deeply important he was in the lives of so many. But anyway, you so that's harm reduction to you, that whole concept of any positive change.
I think that's the easiest definition of it, and the most all-encompassing as well. Because I think I see harm reduction as more, you know, as this gigantic umbrella under which all sorts of things can live.
Yeah.
And should live. That's the point, you know, that we are inclusive, that you can be part of the group, and it's not exclusive like I see so many others, including sometimes 12-step, obviously. And not suggesting that there aren't lots of people that can be a member of that group. Of course there are. And yet there are some pretty heavy duty cliques that live within that, because even if the organization doesn't have an opinion on outside issues, as they like to say, as a friend of mine used to say, every single person inside here does, because they're a human being. Right?
And so that's a good first comparison there. You know, the existence of a needle exchange program or syringe exchange program is sort of like the title of your book. It's true. There's nothing dishonest about it. It is an exchange. And at the same time, it's much more than that. And it's sort of saying, just its existence is tacitly saying, you're not being judged, or like we're up for seeing you and whatever, you know. But 12-step programs, it is people. It is a certain kind of text. There are certain kinds of lessons, and there are ways to do it wrong, I guess. Or I don't know how you make the comparison there.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a right path.
Yeah,
that's the way I think I would put it. They have one real way that you're going to recover.
Yeah, good. Well said. Yeah.
And you know what? It was, I like to say, it was very helpful to me until it wasn't anymore. Now, that's kind of the simple version of that too. Obviously, it was far more complicated than that. I also have this interesting history with AA in particular. That was where I spent most of my time, although I've been in just about every 12-step group that ever existed, and then some. Because my sponsor's sponsor was Bill Wilson, the co-founder of AA. So I had this direct line, if you will, from stories from Doc Earl, my sponsor, about Bill, and even places where they clashed. So one of the things that Bill Wilson wrote was something called the Promises. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you find it, it's in the what we call the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, so the thing that says Alcoholics Anonymous. And it talks about, you know, if you do this, then these wonderful things will happen. And I think it's part of the reason that people get this mistaken belief that all I need to do is to stop using drugs, including alcohol, and my life will, you know, the heavens will open and everything will be great. Right. And I'm like, fucking no. You know, now it actually gets real, because now you are not covering any of that up. and you are trying to deal with your own emotions and with life and everything going on, and that can be quite painful, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I would call Doc Earl periodically, and in some kind of state, and he always called me baby. He was in his 80s when I knew him, so he was the only guy that got to do that. And he'd say, "Baby, you're believing that crap again, huh? About the promises." And I go, "Yeah, I know. I told Bill not to write that shit, and he did it anyway."
Mm-hmm.
And it would just crack me up in the sense that Bill Wilson never intended this to be gospel.
Right.
It was one of his phrases is all roads lead to recovery. He was saying, if all else fails, and what they meant by that, he and Dr. Bob were, if you've tried everything else, then you might try us. This might help.
You think that's
so
what
this
it was?
Never supposed to be a first line treatment, if you will, or a treatment at all. Go ahead.
No, that's
yeah.
I don't know why. I guess I wasn't really adding any value. I was just reflecting.
No, that's fine.
But you think that's what it was? Because so it came to be interpreted, and I imagine you'll talk about that in just a second, as this is what you do if you have some sort of an issue with drugs, with alcohol. I guess alcohol is where it started.
Yeah.
But like when we wrote our book, Outgrowing Addiction, the pushback we got was, first we talked about the mass amounts of people who, if they take a drug, they're fine. Then we talked about the people who they might take a drug and they're not fine, but then the majority of them overcome that and they do it on their own without even any help. And then even the people who do need help tend to thrive over time. And then we mentioned, you're left with the minority. Well, of course, we're extrapolating from the minority of people to talk about what treatments work or not. But our question in the book, then, our thesis is, what do we do for or with that minority of people? People interpreted that from us as like, are you just ignoring them? And of course, we're saying, no, we're just saying that the same rules apply. We should take a broader look about what might be happening in their lives. But it sounds like AA is sort of dealing with that minority. That was
the intention. Yeah, that was the original intention. That again, when you have tried everything else and nothing else has worked, you are still caught in that cycle, that obsession, that compulsion. Why don't you give us a try? Now, we're not going to guarantee and actually people misunderstand this all the time. And Dr. Earl was big on this. So he said there's only one guarantee that AA gives you. And that is, if you work the steps, the 12 steps of AA, you will get a spiritual awakening. That's it. I'm going to forget the line now. It's been too long since I've been in a meeting, but it's essentially, having done all of these steps, I have now had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. That's the phrase.
Right.
And then I'm going to practice these principles, blah, blah, blah. Right. So he said, that's it. People get this all mixed up and think, oh, I'm supposed to get these promises. Nope, that's not the deal. I'm supposed to do this or that or the other thing, and that this is treatment somehow. It's like, no, it's not treatment. It's a support. This is a fellowship of men and women who have come together, who have a common denominator. And that common denominator is, we want to stop having our lives revolve around alcohol, period. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Now, Dr. Bob wanted to add a sincere desire. Or no, that was Bill, sorry. And it was Dr. Bob, who was the older one and apparently a little bit wiser when it came to these things, who said, so who's going to determine who's sincere?
Yeah.
It's like, we don't have AA police. And so he made Bill take that out. So they were already aware, right, that this was not going to be for everyone, that they were not going to have these high standards for people. No, this was about coming together, supporting each other to make a change. People who are drunk were more than welcome to come in. There was none of this, well, I'm not sitting next to somebody who's loaded. It's like, where do you get that from? Honestly, no, that is the point, right? And so if you can get through that meeting of an hour and a half, something like that, good for you. You got through that. Even if you walk out the door and have a drink, in that moment, you had a desire to stop drinking for that hour because you were there. Okay, you're a member. That was it. It was so simple and welcoming. And I saw it become something that was, again, very cliquish, very judgmental, very just nasty sometimes. Yeah. And I hated what it was becoming.
What would have prevented it from being cliquish, do you think? Or what? I don't know what really prevents
I'm not
anything
sure.
from being
Yeah.
cliquish.
I'm not sure what would have. I'm thinking of Black Lives Matter right now and listening to the founder of Black Lives Matter, and there's all this controversy now
Yeah.
that she made herself, or she was voted in to be executive director of an organization that swore it would never have an executive director.
Right.
And so, some of the chapters are going to separate. And one of the reporters or pundits, whoever was talking, was saying, this is what happens with organizations when they start to grow and they start to get money in, all these donations that come in. What's going to happen, we don't know, right? It could be fine. And these are just growing pains and it will turn out okay. However, this could be something more than that. And I don't know that there's a way to avoid that. But I can tell you that I feel very strongly, as many of us do, that when treatment and AA got all mixed up together, that was definitely a nail in the coffin.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. The language changed. Sort of everything changed.
They were like, it seems like it's so well written. Like this is interesting that you and I are able to do this right now. You because you were immersed in it, and I because I just like this exercise anyway. I don't agree with AA, fundamentally disagree with most of its aspects, but you have to wonder, why so many people are involved in it. And it's beautifully written language. And there's so much, like I noticed even the Serenity Prayer. I was talking to a man named Massimo Pigliucci, who just wrote a book about Stoicism recently. And there's Stoic prayer in there, just discussions in there. There's like Buddhist sort of leanings in there. Things that obviously, there are things that are wise that you want to be thinking about in your life in those writings. So I imagine that if the medical field had to contend with this, it's kind of difficult to parse concept and phenomena that's obviously happening to people and maybe they didn't have a good standard for. I get why it would latch on to 12 steps. It's sort of just already there. The playbook's already written.
Right.
But it's not but it sounds like it's not what its founders would have. Maybe they like the money. I don't know. But they don't seem like they would have wanted those two things getting mixed up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I think in the book I talk about Bill going before a subcommittee in the 70s, if I remember right, might have been late 60s. And one of the things he was asked was whether or not we as a country should be using 12-step as a model for treatment, because there wasn't really treatment, rehab as we know it today then. It was just we were becoming aware as a country that perhaps we needed to do something about this. Well, at least that was the thinking. And again, that started when WHO and AMA got together in the 50s and started calling alcoholism and whatever they called addiction back in those days, but alcoholism a disease, to get insurance to cover it.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm sure you know the story. If back in the day, for listeners, this is the short version. If you shot yourself in your foot and you presented to the emergency room, they would take care of it, but they would also hand you a bill because insurance didn't cover self-harm. We'll put it that way. And they saw your drinking or your drug use as self-harm. So therefore they would not cover that with insurance money. And so there was a collusion, if you will, between the Senate, who saw something happening in our country and were concerned about that. I think, as the road to hell is paved, right, there were some good intentions there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as a lot of policy is made, it's usually based on the worst cases. So that's kind of all they see.
Of course.
And it got mixed up with everything else, and now it's a disease. And so now how do we prove it's a disease? And started going down that way, because AA talks about it as a spiritual condition. Essentially how we talk about it. that there's something going on in you that is not fulfilled, if you will, or that's injured. It's been hurt somehow. And this outside thing that you are taking, or this behavior that you're doing, can somehow make you feel better. And that's for so many people how we wind up kind of in that compulsive obsessive loop. It's through that because it works.
There's a medical theocracy that we had to meet with, and there's a strategy to service a billing code, which was, let's call it a disease, and then they had to say, all right, now that it has to be a disease, how can we make it one?
Yeah.
And it's
now we've got the theory. Now we need to go prove it. Yeah.
And it does seem obvious that it's most AA trumpeters, or people who are deep into AA. That's a soft way to say that. They'll say that addiction's a disease. At least that might be the bias of my own.
Yeah, no, they do.
But it does seem strange that something so you might imagine like a Eckhart Tolle writing a book like that, or the same sort of language now, and he wouldn't be calling it a disease, and nor does the program really in its text seem to suggest that it is. So yeah, I guess. So I see the wisdom from all angles there, I guess is what I'm saying. And I also see how it's not compatible, and it started to get messy. So I see why people would turn to something like AA or a disease model. But also it's alluring because it seems to have the answers for you.
Again, it's back to that simple answer.
Yeah,
right. It's like it explains things. And again, back to Bruce Alexander today in saying, it answers the question for parents as well, and for families, that says, it's nothing that you did. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that that's why people behave the way they do, because we all had terrible parents. It's not that simple, right? And it's so far complicated, and we have a very difficult time in particularly this American culture to have complications and to make them be societal in their answers.
Yes, yeah.
Right? Yeah. We can't look at things like having a real living wage all over the country, to have real equality in jobs or in training or in education or in housing. That's a huge task. But we can look at the simple one. It's called drugs. Drugs are bad. They're causing all the problems. So we'll go after the drug.
Right. It's very uncomfortable to have a problem and know that there is not a set solution for it in any given dimension or circumstance. So right. And so harm reduction is sort of, it says there is a blueprint and a framework, but you don't have the answer. You have to do some thinking, or some connecting in order to move forward.
Right. So I think it's also individual in that sense.
It is, yeah, that's true.
Right, that
very true.
Your solution or solutions, because there could be more than one, are going to possibly be different than mine.
Yeah, there's like a temporal context, the individual context, the societal, cultural context. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it is. One of the interesting things I think that happened, just to throw this in and to the mix, because it complicates things even more.
Good.
So I'm presenting at the Harm Reduction Conference a year or something like that after my book came out. And I have this talk called Coming to Harm Reduction, Kicking and Screaming, okay. And I have a good audience here in Oakland, downtown. We're a lovely day having this great conversation. And I had some people in the kind of front rows who asked me a question during the Q&A at the end of this, and say, so very shyly, we're part of 12-step, and we are unable to talk about our recovery at work because work is harm reduction and we're seen as the enemy. And I was like, oh my God. And then thought about, why am I surprised that harm reductioners, some, would be biased against 12-steppers, kind of playing in their pool, if you will.
Right.
When we're just human beings too, right? We get to make mistakes. But I thought, isn't that sad that we are uncomfortable with this other way of thinking and not bringing them into the fold and saying, how can we have these conversations rather than just saying you're wrong? That's bad. It's terrible. You know, it's damaging. And it is all those things to some people. Yeah. And harm reduction, maybe, right? I'm not suggesting for a moment it's the be all and end all for every single person. However, because harm reduction includes everything, I can make the argument, I think, better,
Right.
that whatever you want to do, including abstinence,
Right.
certainly fits under this umbrella. So let me share this umbrella with you because mine's bigger than yours.
Right.
So it'll just help you more. Right?
That's
and you won't be alone.
That's exactly. I was having a conversation with Ann Earl. Do you know Ann?
Mm-hmm. I know of her.
And she works at the Life Process program, and we did an interview that will come out soon. And we were talking about, isn't it interesting that we have clients that are both going to 12-step meetings all the time and that do our program. And we talked a little bit about, well, why is that? And it's, as you say, we have a large umbrella. We don't say, if you're practicing 12 steps or believe something like that, you can't be in our club or something, you know?
Right.
Because that would be exactly antithetical to what harm reduction is. So you can't do that. So I know exactly what you mean. But which is funny that there would be that schism between harm reduction and things like 12 steps, to the extent that people are feeling uncomfortable being a part of their. I understand the discomfort. If you're a harm reduction, if you're a harm reduction oriented person, then I know I know I see the frustration, and you say, all right, here's the blueprint. People say, yeah, those are great ideas, and so you do that. We'll do some 12 steps, and we'll do. It's like, no, you're just assimilating what I just said into the standard boxes.
Right.
So I get that frustration.
Yeah.
But to not be able to actually have a personal relationship, or not be able to feel like you're comfortable enough to come into work or something like that.
Yeah.
That seems antithetical. So how have you? I mean, I'm sure you've experienced that all the time. You probably still do. How do you overcome that, or how do you engage with people so that it sort of trumps the schism?
Well, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I have, at least I understand, lost a job because I had students that were uncomfortable with my bashing the 12 steps.
Interesting.
Even though I never did that.
Yes, you are not a likely candidate to have done that. Yeah, that's funny.
And I would, even in the classroom, I had a student one time, and what I showed was my piece on Penn and Teller that I did years ago. So the 12 stepping on Penn and Teller bullshit, and from which I got death threats, by the way. So in there, and I actually stopped it in one class, I remember well, because this young man said, so you're telling me to go shoot heroin again? And I said, wow, where did that come from? And first of all, how did you get in the room? Because this is a professional certification program, right? We're not talking about you, we're talking about your clients. But okay, we'll put that aside and say, so
I thought you were going to say, like, this is the women's bathroom.
So how did you hear that? And I even asked the class, I said, did anybody else hear me say that? And please, you know, if that's what you heard, please say something, you know, and we can kind of unpack this and talk about it. And nobody else said anything. And he said, you know, you're bashing the 12 steps. And I said, well, that's a little hard for me to do, since I talk about my time in 12 step as being very beneficial for the most part. Some of it was not, which is part of the reason I'm not there, but I think it was really helpful in the beginning. So how can I do that and bash? I mean, what I can do is I can critique it. Yes. And that's what we do here. We critique things. That is part of being an adult and part of being a professional. And you know what? When I was in service, meaning volunteering, at sort of the upper levels, or actually lower, but we won't go into that, in AA, one of the things that we used to do was to do what we called a 4-step. And essentially it was just looking at, so how did we do this year? You know, did we improve things? Are there areas we still need to work on? Are the members happy? Or, you know, blah, 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 which a lot of companies do, right? Annually or something like that. They just don't call it a 4-step. So, you know, we were critiquing ourselves. That was part of the process. And nobody got upset about it. Nobody said, how dare you? You're bashing 12-step. No. This is part of what you need to do. So it was really disturbing to me. And I have to admit, it took me by surprise. But that person apparently was really adamant and that I should lose my job. And I did.
Wow. That's,
So,
what do you
yeah.
think? I mean, you can look back on it now. I imagine it was probably difficult to like play devil's advocate at that point, because I don't know. I don't know that I would have done a very good job of dealing with that. I don't know
I
how
did
you
not
did.
do a very good job.
I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But looking back, I mean, if you gave him any of the benefit of the doubt, or like tried to understand where he was coming from, I mean, would you say maybe there's something that he believes in that he feels saving his life, that's life preserving, and then when you said something that didn't jibe with him, that it's almost like you're attacking his sense of self or something like that? I don't want to psychoanalyze, but I could imagine that being the.
I think that's right. You know, it's like that's why it gets compared to a religion sometimes, or even a cult.
Yeah.
That it can't handle criticism. And I say, gosh, that was part of the deal when I was there. Like I said, that was what we did. I don't think that happens anymore, from what I understand from some folks that are still in it and do some of that service work. I recently had that conversation because I was curious, and I thought, isn't that too bad? So now it's become this protected monolith, and you are not allowed to have any other thoughts. When I left AA and I struggled with whether I should or not and what I was doing, and I mean, I was in tears half the time. How do I do this? What do I do? And it was mostly based on the fact that I was taking psychiatric medications at that point and was told I wasn't clean anymore. I wasn't sober. Now we say that about people on medication assisted treatment, right? Back then it was any kind of medication. And I had just sort of had enough of that and thought, well, this is not helping me, because I need to talk about this. And if this isn't the right place, well, then I don't know where it is, because everything relates to my drug use. So I better be talking about this. And I went to Doc Earl and said, I don't know what to do. And he said, you know what, baby, AA is always going to be there. If you want to come back, you come back. Go live your life. You're going to be fine. And, he essentially gave me permission, for lack of a better word, to find my own path, and maintained our friendship, our mentorship. Now he wasn't so much a sponsor anymore, but he was a mentor. He was on my master's committee, he and his wife, both. So, they were a very important part of my life until they died. And I know that a lot of people don't have that kind of experience when they leave, and I get that. And I'm really sorry. I'm also very grateful that my experience was a really positive one. Yeah.
Do you feel like you lost a community when you went off on your own?
Yep. I lost the first community I lost was the bar, because I worked in clubs for a long time, and that was like my family. My son grew up there. I mean, I was pregnant when I started working there. So that was a real family. I bought cars from guys that came into the club. I mean, it was, if I needed a plumber, there was somebody there that I could go to. And then from there, I found AA. And we used to joke that they're the same people that you used to drink and use with, but they're just not drinking and using. Right?
Yeah, that's funny.
So that's it. Right. And I thought, yeah, they're right. These are still my people. Right. And so I felt very comfortable. My son, who was like 8 or 9 at the time, one time said to me, "You have too many friends, Mom," because we'd run into people all the time that I knew from the fellowship. That's what we called it. And that felt great, to have something that was kind of a substitute for the environment that I had left. I'm not very connected to my family. So I was really craving that as well. And I've never fully recovered from that. I mean, I do have very good and close relationships, but not an automatic community like you get with that. Yeah.
And that's a good segue to something I wanted to talk to you about, which is we're still no clear end in sight of a global pandemic. And obviously, I don't have to say it out loud, but I'll just will, that, isolation is now ubiquitous. I imagine that you just as a person, but also you as a professional are probably helping people through the the negative.
The uncomfortability.
Well, yeah, the uncomfortability, just all of the negative kickbacks of isolation. And now it's not like you can say, well, you know what, if you get optimistic and put one foot in front of the other, then you'll be all right and you can go in a crack. You can't do that because you're not allowed to do it. So how have you been dealing with that? That's a big question, but we can start there.
No kidding. And of course, we spoke earlier, I'm in California and we're under lockdown again.
Yeah.
I was conducting a training yesterday, a workshop for San Francisco for the Department of Public Health. And in the midst of that, my phone started making all this noise. I thought it was an Amber Alert. And so did theirs because they work for the county. Right? So it was all going up. You're like, what is going on? And it was just telling us again that there is a lockdown, that you need to stay home. That's kind of it. And I have been in my 740 square feet. And at that point, frankly, I'd been inside for 2 days. I didn't even have a chance to literally walk out the door and go get the mail. I mean, nothing. And that's what it's been like during the holidays, especially. For the first time in my life, I've had clients ask me to work next week and say, I'm kind of okay, but I'm kind of concerned with the holidays. I just want to make sure, this is something I kind of rely on that happens every week or every 2 weeks, whatever it is, consistently. And I'd really like to check in before that. And so I was going to take some time off and I can't leave anyway now. So I said, that's fine. And frankly, I used to work the holidays all the time because, as you know, when we work in this field, those are the times when people need to be connected even more. And the holidays are tough just in of themselves. And then you add this on top of it. So, and I found out one of my best mates, who happens to be in Canada, has COVID.
Wow.
So I got to call her tomorrow and see. Gratefully, she's pretty healthy and a little younger than me. But, that's scaring me.
Yeah.
So I know one of the things that's been kind of cute is sharing on occasion with a client, it's okay that you're feeling this way. I'm feeling this way, and they'll go, really? You? Yeah, man, I'm a human being, and just because I know all these things in my head of things I could be doing in the meditation and the deep breathing exercises, that doesn't mean that that's the first thing that comes in my head either. These are extraordinary times and we're human.
There is of course you got to understand self-care, and of course it's helpful to hear how people are coping in positive ways with this, but it's also nice to hear you say, hey, how about we give ourselves permission to just be honest about the fact that none of this is normal and it all kind of sucks. It's like, there's only so much thinking about silver linings you can do when you're in.
Well, one of the things, speaking of harm reduction, that I have done more of in the last few months is say to people, and I'd say probably half the folks that come to me want abstinence as a goal. And the other half are probably somewhere in between. There's some people definitely just want moderation, or at least they want to start there. But anyway, so even sometimes with folks right now who have that abstinence goal, I have said to them, maybe this isn't the time. I don't know how you feel about that. This isn't my decision to make, but I just want to remind you, it's okay. If we can find a safer way for you to reduce right now, or a safer way to use this drug or this behavior, maybe that makes more sense if this is helping you, because you can't get all of those other supports that you normally would be able to if we weren't in shelter, if COVID wasn't happening. So
I know that you're not the type to really give your client advice, but so that's probably not something you normally do. Say, hey, maybe now's not the time, but special circumstances deal for special measures, I guess. Is that
that's true.
It's something you're doing now because, it sounds like you're reading what's on people, obviously on people's minds. It's like if abstinence is your goal and now you're locked in your house forever, it's like you kind of want to be above board and say, look, you can do whatever you need to do, but don't beat yourself up. If you decide to have a drink, that's what drinking's for.
Yeah. Well, and I have said that to a few clients as well, when they get kind of blown away that they're drinking or using something, and what's the matter with me?
Yeah.
And I'll say to them, look, I can barely tolerate my place, and all I have to deal with is my cat Izzy, who is a handful. He tends to Zoom bomb, but you're not seeing him today. But he had a rough morning. So, but you have 3 kids at home, and you're trying to now be a teacher and do school, and you're working on top of it, and you've got other things that you're doing, and you've got a partner, and it's like, and I'll say to them, I'd be drinking too, or whatever it is. I have, so it's okay. Let's not beat ourselves up anymore. I get that isn't what you want. And let's hold on to that. Yes. And let's be more sensible. As Alan Marlatt would have called it, right? Let's be more pragmatic. Right. And I'm a Midwest girl at heart. We're pragmatic. It's like, it would be nice if the world was like this, and it's not but, just and. Yes, so where is it right now? Let's just be there. And we'll still keep our eye on that.
Yeah. People tend to understand what I'm saying when I talk about kids, as opposed to saying the same thing but applied to adults. Yeah. So let me bring it to the childhood level. And we talk about kids whose behavior is challenging. I actually hate saying it that way, but that's what their charge is. And it seems pretty common sense to people to say, well, you could think about ways to change their environment, but also, there's demands being placed on them that they either don't have the skills to meet, or they don't think that they have the skills to meet. So you can either lower those expectations or change expectations, or you can foster skills, or both. And it sounds like what you're saying to your clients is, and maybe that's something you've done yourself, is you can continue looking at silver linings. You can keep thinking about meditation, how to get over this thing. But at the same time, there is this weird demand being placed on you right now that's anything but normal, and so, and you can't change that demand. So what you can do is change the ways that you can cope with it. And you don't want to toss anything out at this point, if having a drink is going to help you cope in a way that actually betters your life in these circumstances, then why would you throw that out?
How can you have a drink versus 5? How can you have a beer instead of 5 shots of tequila? Or so it's, and I think that's also a good conversation to have at any point with folks around drinking. And you could use another drug in the same kind of conversation. How do you maybe not mainline or shoot heroin, but instead snort it? How can we take those baby steps? I talk, my clients would tell you forever about baby steps. One of my, and here's my movie reference. In fact, we just watched this during Thanksgiving. I was in the mood for a good comedy, and one of the ones that we love is What About Bob?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the book, right? Death therapy. And I could use a little death therapy in some ways, right? And Bill Murray talking about, or actually it's Richard Dreyfuss that writes the book called, I think, Baby Steppin'. And it's Bill Murray that takes that, and then he's baby stepping everything. And I think, but that is it. That is how you make change. You take baby steps, and you also go for what you think is going to work, that you're going to be successful at. And so that's another piece of this. Instead of saying, well, you have to be abstinent and you've got to do it right now. I get that's your goal. So we look at that. Well, how can you take a baby step toward that goal? So let's just shift the focus to be successful, because what I know about change, and I've studied very gratefully with some of the, best people that have researched it, when you make a change that's successful, that gets you motivated to make another change, right? Or take another step.
Yeah.
If you pick a bite that's too big and you're unsuccessful, then most of the time you get a good case of what I call the fuck it's.
Yeah.
And go, fuck it. See, I tried, it didn't work. Okay, I'm just going to go back and I'm a failure, or this will never work. So I might as well just keep doing whatever I'm doing. Well, and as you said in the beginning, if you don't try at all, I guarantee nothing's going to change.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a common, not a rule, but a commonality about that too, which I know that you know about, but so I'm just saying it for value of the listeners and viewers. But there, you make a small change enough times that you begin to think of yourself as someone who can complete successfully a task and have some sort of a purpose. I feel like those small steps really compound relatively quickly. So they're not all of a sudden it's a lifestyle change rather than small steps toward this like abyss.
I recently made some big changes in my nutrition for one of the chronic pain conditions that I have. It seems that inflammation plays a big role. And of course, I mean, we now know that it may very well play a role in things like depression and other medical conditions as well, right? So I've been working my way up to this. And I like to say I was in ambivalence for about 2 years. Yeah, I want to do this, but oh my God, do I really have to make another change? I've given up this and this and this and this. Isn't that enough?
I know what you mean.
I'm too old. I don't want to do any changes anymore. And I laughed about that a lot. I don't beat myself up very much anymore. I leave that to other people who are happy to do that for me. And so I finally came around to this shift, and it was all about baby stepping. And it was important for me to find somebody, which also took a couple of years, that would do what I wanted. So for instance, I do a sort of paleo, but I'm a vegetarian and have been for 30 years. So I'm not going to eat meat again. And nobody could figure out how to make those things fit together. Here's harm reduction.
Kind of like harm reduction and disease model. If anyone can do it, it's you.
And I was determined, and here I am in Berkeley. There's got to be somebody that does this.
That's true. Yeah, good point.
Come on. So I did finally find somebody, and she was terrific. But it was, again, about those baby steps. And the other piece I realized was that nobody could tell me, very much like the work we do, that if I just do X, Y, and Z, that will solve the problem.
Right. Still coming
I don't know.
Still coming from you. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it's going to work or not. And I found somebody who would say, look, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I'm willing to hang in there with you and give you the best advice I can, the best suggestions I can. It's going to be up to you to decide what you're going to do. And we don't know for sure if this is really going to be helpful, but what have you got to lose?
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that sort of approach to this.
I like that you brought it to that level. You're talking about harm reduction, but not with respect to drugs and alcohol, but just a lifestyle change, which of course that has to be true. It has to work across the lifespan, but a lot of people they talk about this stuff as revolving around drugs and alcohol.
That's right.
What is your, I think I know, but it'll be good to hear. What's your thought about that in terms of whatever? I don't know if you use the term addiction or care about it, but I like to use it because it's a phenomenon that you want to name. It could be as broad as you want. But anyway, do you see it as being fluid, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or anything else? Do you see that drugs and alcohol are fundamentally different in some way, or something else?
I think that drugs are different if we look at illicit drugs, only because they're illicit.
Yes.
Okay.
So nothing physically different about them or mechanically different, right?
Exactly. However, we may have a different experience of them because they're illegal, right? Thank you, Norm Zinberg, drug set setting. And I think that's very true. So both personally and professionally, and I'm sure you've seen the same phenomenon too, that does make a difference in people's experience. However, behaviors very much play a role in this too. And certainly when we look at food or nutrition, because food is a drug.
Hmm.
We don't like to talk about it that way, certainly in this country, but it is. Absolutely. You're putting a substance into your body that is changing your blood chemistry because you want it to. Same reason I use drugs and alcohol. I took it because I wanted it to change my brain.
Right.
Thank you. No, that doesn't make it a disease. That was the purpose of it. And I think I'm also getting more and more interested. It's kind of where I started was in nutrition. I had written a curriculum with some colleagues in graduate school on nutrition for what we called then chemical dependency.
What don't you know, by the way?
Yeah,
What haven't you studied?
So I know, but I kind of lost my way and let that go for a while and then kind of returned to it recently and thought, this is really fundamental. And I'm not suggesting that it's, again, going to be the be all panacea that's going to solve every problem. However, if you look at what you're putting into your body, which is your brain, right? Again, thank you, Descartes. Yeah, they're connected. It's called a neck.
Yes,
right.
Descartes.
So,
good reference, Descartes.
Yeah, thank you. That man has a lot to pay for. Anyway, so we look at this connection and say, so what I'm putting in here is obviously going to alter, or it's going to have an influence on the way I think and on the way I feel, and therefore on the way I behave.
Yeah.
That's just common sense. So let me do the best I can. Now, this also feeds into the idea that we talked about earlier of if people don't have access to good food, if they don't have, the ability to afford it, yada, yada, yada. So, yeah, I realize that there's privilege in there and there's a lot of complications with that. But our diet, the standard American diet is like, oy vey. How much worse could it be? Not much. Right. Whatever we're doing.
And that's actually, I think, more privilegey that we have that so many of us have access to the ingredients for a healthy diet, but we abuse that privilege and overeat. Anyway.
Yeah. And isn't it ironic that the cheaper choice is BK and Mickey D's at the $2 meal that you can have? I get it, right? Yeah. It's like, I've been there. I was that single mom for a long time. So we've got but there's that social cultural piece that needs to shift. Well, I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, but it's beginning to make some baby steps. We're making some inroads there, and that's great. So when I look at that, I certainly see that as equivalent to any legal or illegal substance I currently put in my body or I did previously, including alcohol and other things. As far as other behaviors are concerned, it gets a little trickier. Do those behaviors cause our brains to fire neurochemicals in this very much in a same pattern or similar to what chemicals will do? Sure, absolutely. We know that. Does that mean that it's on par with those other substances? I don't know. Sure, for an individual, I used to say you could get addicted to dill pickles if you want. If that's your thing, you, the individual, can get addicted to anything because it's not about what you're ingesting anywhere. That's a smaller part than we generally think of it in our culture, right? Thank you, Bruce Alexander and others. And of course, Stanton's one of those too. That says, that is a part of how we change ourselves, but it also is all this other stuff out here that we conveniently don't really look at much. We call it the biopsychosocial spiritual model. That's what I grew up in. And yet we're really focused on what you're putting into your body as far as particularly illicit chemicals.
Yeah.
But alcohol as well.
Yeah, but any good clinician, anyone worth their salt is going to, first of all, if they're the ones who are going to be giving a diagnosis, they're not looking at a brain scan. It's they don't care if something's doing something neurochemically or not. They're looking at your behavior, and if you're behaving in some way that's detrimental, of course it doesn't matter. And you start there, so it's not like you don't go back to was it a dill pickle or was it a drug?
Right.
So in that sense, it's almost like it could be a philosophically interesting conversation to parse deeper than that. But I hear what you're saying on the basic level of helping human beings or helping ourselves. You kind of have to not care about that, or, you know, it's kind of useless practically.
Yeah. And one of the things that disturbs me, and I went through, well, I have a client that went through this recently. It is about the way that other professionals look at behavior and have decided that, you know, we kind of know, and we use the DSM as a weapon, not as a tool.
Yeah.
And then determine that because, and the instance was a partnership, you know, two people in this relationship, one of them said, you're an addict, essentially. Then there was me going, well, is that true or not? And the one partner saying, you have to stop. And, you know, me saying to the other partner, well, you can, you know, that's certainly your choice. And how would your partner feel if you were, I don't know, let's say you decided to take up skydiving or drive sports cars, you know, some other kind of risky behavior, in other words.
Yes.
And the partner was adamant. No, it's the drugs that are the problem, and you have to give that up, and you've got to do this. And my client finally decided, you know, I don't want to do that. This isn't a problem. It's a preference.
Yeah.
It's a life. And does he sometimes use in a risky way? Yes. And that's the work that I do, right? And that we talk about. And he tells me the truth because there's no judgment here, right? There's no reason to lie to me, because we can say, well, okay, how did it go? Yeah, well, you know, I think I used too much and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so what do you want to do about it, if anything? Yeah,
so that's interesting. Yes, that's so interesting and so down to earth, because you help the person realize what they prefer, and then obviously there's some sort of a problem, or else why are you talking? And it sounds like the problem there is like, well, on one hand, this could get risky, so maybe I can figure out a way to do it in a less risky way. And on the other hand, there is this spouse that, do I care about? You know, if I care about them and they think this, then there's some negotiating to do, and that's a problem too that, you know, we're discussing. Yeah.
It just doesn't automatically mean that the person using the drugs is the one that has to change all their life and their thinking.
Right.
It's like, hold on here. You know, aren't we supposed to negotiate here in a relationship? I mean, what do I know? I got married 3 times and I'm divorced. So, you know, maybe I'm not the best one to talk about that. But I think the last time I recall, you know, this is about negotiation. And I think that's part of the problem I had back then, because I wasn't willing to do that you know, very well. Maybe I didn't know how. And it's like, you know, why do I get to determine how you're going to behave? Now, I can also say, you know what, Zach, you're doing shit that I can't live with it. And then I get to make a decision about whether I stay or go or have some other kind of relationship with you, right? But I don't get to blame you for the misery of this relationship and say it's all you and your drug use. Otherwise, everything would be fine. No, now we've reduced it down again. And could it be that? I suppose, but I don't think it is most of the time.
Simple answers.
Yeah.
I wanted to get to this. You wrote a chapter in your book about Stanton, an interview with Stanton.
Yeah.
Is that, I wanted to make sure that was the right book. I remember reading it, then I saw your face just now. Thought, oh no, am I getting this wrong?
And I'm not sure I'll remember it. So there we go.
Well, could you talk a little bit about, because the people who are listening, watching, or people who have either just started this program or maybe interested in what it's all about. Some people found it because they know Stanton, so they look for it and seeking it. Some people don't know him until they watched his first little intro video. Tell me about your experience with him.
So
give me the good, bad, and the ugly.
I'm going to.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
I only know how to do warts and all.
Oh, good.
So Stanton was so he was evil incarnate when I was in school doing my AOD, my alcohol and other drug certification.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. Which I have, by the way, since given up willingly after 20 years. In great part because of their lack of commitment to harm reduction.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about it from a couple of people, but no movement out of 12-step, no offering of other things, and not really talking about harm reduction. And I just said, I've had enough of this shit. So anyway, and this feeds into Stanton. So when I was thinking about the book and thinking about who would I interview, kind of who am I interested in, and I went to Pat, I think, and asked about Stanton. Gosh, do I interview him? Do I put him in here? Oh my God. I mean, he's like, the antithesis of everything that we learn in school that you're supposed to be a good drug counselor, right? And she said, absolutely. You need to do that, Dee-dee. And so I thought, oh shit, here we go. So, I'm going to go speak to the devil. I mean, was that bad? That's how he's thought of in that world.
Yeah.
And so I reached out to him, and I will say that Stanton was the only person that ever flew out when I was having a rough time and said, I'm coming out. And he got on a plane, and I picked him up at the airport, and he hung out with me for 2 or 3 days.
He is that way.
He was also getting some information for a book that he was writing, which is fine with me. But what's important is that he was there, right? Yeah. And he said, I'm going to come out and we'll talk. And we just hung out, and we had lunch and went for walks, and and that meant a lot to me. Yeah. So I kind of went backwards and started looking at some of his work as a result of that, and realized that this is part of the problem. Not allowing for Stanton or others' voices in my education was just as unethical as only allowing in rehab for there to be 12 steps and abstinence. This is wrong. And it made me double down on making sure what I taught and what I brought to the classroom was not necessarily what those folks were going to get in the general population or in their own agency or something like that. So for instance, this semester I taught substance use disorders in our graduate studies, forensic and counseling psychology department at the university. And I showed Monica Richardson's film, The 13th Step.
Yes. Yeah.
And there were a couple of people that were really upset about it. And kind of challenged me on it. And I said, I hear you. Yeah, it's disturbing. And you're right. She is looking at a minority, and she is looking at, she's focusing on the negative. Absolutely. And I said, and I'm doing that because you already get the other side. You already get how great 12-step is, and everybody should be in there and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying it doesn't help people. That's not the point. The point is, it's my job as an educator, and particularly in graduate school for wannabe therapists, that you get exposed to the rest of it, so that when you are offering information to your clients in the future, you think about that. And when somebody comes in and says, I'm not comfortable in these groups, and here's why, you're going to be able to pull from that and go, okay, I believe you and I get it. And let's find something else, rather than trying to pressure them into continuing or find a way, as we like to say, well, it's helped a lot of people. Let's talk about it. Let's find a way. Fuck that. I'm sorry. No, I don't want to find a way. I want you to listen to me. Yeah. Right? And if I want to change my mind down the road, that's fine too. But listen to me now. This isn't comfortable for me. Yeah. And go in that direction. So I'm very happy that somebody was disturbed by it. Uncomfortable was probably a better word. Yeah, that's my job.
You're talking about making education a heterodoxy. It's not. You can't.
Big words. Yeah.
Yeah, I just looked it up. No, I'm just kidding. It's like the education is supposed to be that, right? It's the opposite. You're not supposed to have a bent when you're just like introducing human beings to the world.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to love one aspect or another aspect or method or something like that, but you're sort of, people have an obligation as teachers to introduce concepts that, all in all.
Yeah,
So,
I think so.
it's responsible of you.
Well, thanks. I mean, I don't like this sort of PC-ness that we've got in education around safety.
Yeah.
Well, we've got to make it safe for everybody in the classroom. And I'd say, how do you do that exactly when you've got 35 different people who have had different life experiences?
Yeah, that's
for whom that word means something completely different from what it even means to you. How am I supposed to do that as a fellow human being?
I feel like that says something about you as an educator and your your commitment to educating people properly and like the justice to the education that you like to do, because you I don't know if I'm allowed to say this about you, but you seem like a very much a person who aligns with social justice movements, and think you have that compassionate side to you. You're like a very
thanks.
Yeah. And but so to hear you say, well, yeah, but you can't just like make every educational conversation feel safe. How do you, like, who's going to patrol that? And when do you know you're making a mistake or not? First, I guess once you say it out loud, it's very commonsensical. But it's not as easy if you're in that mindset. It's not as easy as you might think to practice it. I know, because I work with high school.
I know you do.
So
so
I want to say that says a lot.
Well, thanks. The other side that I hear, of course, because we're stuck in our binaries.
Yeah.
Well, then you're saying that you want to make people unsafe.
Right. Of course.
Right. Where did you get that? Why do we only have two choices?
Yeah.
It's like, why is it a disease or it's not? Why can't it be both and? Why maybe, and I ran this past Alan Marlatt many years ago. And so, because I'd come out of this workshop and this guy blew my mind, talking about this. And his thesis was that perhaps that small minority that we were talking about earlier, that has the compulsion, the obsession, and doesn't seem to be able to stop unless they're in jail, they're in rehab, maybe something. There's strict parameters around what they're doing. Maybe those people do have a disease. Maybe that is who we're talking about. The same people that AA was originally designed to assist and support, and everybody else does not. And so there's a different treatment for them too. This is very medically based, so lots of medication to help support that. Right. Lots of work. Probably they're going to need to be in residential care for a long period of time. So put the dollars there for those folks. Everybody else can do sort of the outpatient kind of thing, like what you guys do, that kind of idea. If that doesn't work, they can always go over to the other side. But, and he saw it as distinct. So people that did not have the disease are never going to get the disease. And I just, you can hear it now. I'm like, this fucking blows my mind. I don't know if you've ever even heard of this, right? So it's like, where is this being talked about anyway?
Yeah.
Anyway, I went to Alan afterwards immediately, called him, because we didn't have texting and all that in those days.
What?
And said, I know. It's, what do you make of this? Is this possible? I don't know what to do with this. And he said, sure. Why not? That works for me. And I was like, really? Okay. And thought, so there we go. Right? There's the middle. That's all the other colors in the crayon box. It's like, I'm so tired of black and white.
Alan Bartlett was very much a it works if it works kind of a person.
Well,
first principles.
Yeah, that's right. There's that pragmatic.
Yeah.
He's a Canadian. What do you expect?
Exactly. Maybe he was just too polite. He and Bruce Alexander both.
Yeah, that's right.
By the way, what's the book that he just wrote? The big book about the Bruce Alexander.
Oh, the globalization.
Globalization. He sent that to me because this is like a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I was going to be talking to him, and I read it. I was like, Poof. It took a long time. It's a dense read. You got to be interested.
I know. I haven't read the whole thing, I will admit.
And I got back to him and I said, I still don't know if this is like totally profound, and he meant it that way, or if he just like misspoke or didn't even mean it. But I said, well, I finished Globalization of Addiction. And he says, you don't finish that book. Like, that's a book you don't fit or something. I don't even know what it means if it's profound. It's just so if
Well, what I read was he did a talk to the Senate of Canada. And I don't have a date on this thing, but it came across my desk somehow. And that's what I was reading. So this was essentially talking about how people are not addicted to the drug. That's not the deal.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't even imagine anybody going before our Senate and even being allowed to say that out loud.
Right.
It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. Carl Hart might be the next person, but if anyone.
Yeah. Oh God, what a guy. I know, I got to see him a couple of years ago. He was so terrific, although I wish he had had the stage to himself. I think he did too.
No.
Only because the person that was up there was not really a harm reductionist. And we could all see he was trying to be polite, and he was, he accomplished that, but it was kind of, you got the impression that he was censoring, kind of self-censoring a bit.
That Carl was, or that the moderator? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
that Carl was. Yeah. Yeah.
He is like
my God, we just need him up there. Get her off the stage.
No. Well, when you start with drugs are not the problem, you're going to split the crowd, maybe,
Yeah.
But at least you know it. Dee-dee, I've had you on the hook for an hour and a half, and it's been awesome.
I know. I just realized that. Thank you. See,
well, thank
you. Turned my day around, so thank you.
Oh, good.
I appreciate that too.
I was hoping that it was. I love having these long form conversations, and I always hope that
I do too.
I'm talking to other people who do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have I left anything out here besides everything? But like, is there anything you'd love to talk about or plug or anything like that?
What can I plug? I can
Anything
plug here. I will remember something for a change. FSDP, Families for Sensible Drug Policy, that I do the blog for. We put together an ebook of my blogs, plus a chapter from my book on the definition of harm reduction, kind of talking about what is this thing called harm reduction. And what else? And put a nice cover on it. Had a friend of mine do the graphics for that and the back cover, and put it on a tidy ebook. That is our fundraiser for this year. That's the point of it. So I believe it's a minimum $10 donation.
Oh, wow.
And it comes in 3 different formats, if I remember, and I don't even know what they all are. I know one of them is for Kindle, another one's for Apple kind of tablet, and I think the other one's just plain old PDF. So that's not my bailiwick. So, but that is available on FSDP's website, which is just fsdp.org. So Families for Sensible Drug Policy.org. And that would be great. It's a terrific organization that is working to change these crazy drug laws. So I think that's the last thing I would say would be, you mentioned something about my background or my desire in social justice, that I was raised in a church of social justice. In fact, it's the church apparently that Barack Obama also grew up in, that he had to leave because of, you may remember the controversy with his pastor early in his presidency.
No, I don't remember. I feel embarrassed.
Look it up.
I should definitely remember this.
And so he made some controversial remarks, and President Obama felt that was told at least, he needed to distance himself from some of that. And I get that, but it's part of the United Church of Christ. And essentially it's a non-denominational church. It got tired of all the rules and all the other churches and said, there aren't any here, but we believe in people and we believe in social justice. So I had a minister who knew that I was, as a kid, using drugs and said, that's okay. You keep coming anyway. When a lot of people said, throw her out. That's not what we do here. You're encouraging that. So that's part of my history with harm reduction as well. Of appreciating some of the folks along the way. And my dad was another one who said, what's wrong is that these drugs are illegal. And so when kids and people show up in the emergency room, nobody can treat them because they don't know what the hell they've taken. So no, I don't want cocaine or whatever it is on every street corner in some vending machine. But we need to regulate and we need to monitor things, not like monitoring in the sense of Big Brother, monitoring what's in things. But when people show up in the emergency room under the influence of alcohol, we know it's alcohol because it's got the little tax stamp and the seal on the bottle, and the bottle has all the information. So we know. And in these days with fentanyl and carfentanil and other analogs running around out there, in everything, you don't know what you're getting, even more so than it was when I was, back in the 70s and the 80s using shit. So to me, that again is just pragmatic and sensible. And it doesn't mean that I think drugs are the answer. It just means I know that they're also not the problem. People use for reasons. And until we're willing to look at those reasons, things ain't going to change.
We should end it right there.
Yep.
Dee-dee, thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you,
of
Zach.
course, I'll link to your website and everything you talked about at FSDP in the show notes. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and hope we talk soon.
Thanks so much, Zach. I really appreciate it. And thanks to your listeners as well.